And welcome to the Mosaic, APU's network of faculty and staff and ethnic affinity organizations. And this particular panel event is sponsored by our Latinx group, Latinx Faculty, Staff, and Administrator Association, the LFSAA. And our topic for today is creating space for a sense of belonging at APU, and this is a Latinx perspective. And facilitating our important panel today of esteemed colleagues and friends are two other colleagues and friends. We have Dr. Carmen Varela with us today as a facilitator, and Dr. to be Christine Guzman. And so I'm going to let you know a little bit about them. And we're just so excited about this event and for them both to be facilitating today. And they are also co-directors of our LFSAA group. So Carmen, I'll start with her. Carmen was born in El Paso, Texas, and is a first-generation Chicana, Mexican-American, and currently serves as the Director of Accessibility and Disability Resources at APU. She's worked as a disability and civil rights practitioner for 27 years in Texas and in California. She worked for 16 years at Disability Rights California, the largest disability rights law firm in California and the US. She is trilingual and is fluent in English, Spanish, and American Sign Language, and has worked as a trilingual interpreter for deaf victims of human trafficking from Mexico and Central and South America. Carmen's scholarly research examines the intersection of disability and race as it pertains to educational attainment and best disability counseling practices in the US. So thank you, Dr. Varela, for co-facilitating with us today. And Christine Guzman, PhD candidate. Christine serves as Azusa Pacific University's Title IX coordinator. Christine works collaboratively with the Office of the President and campus division leaders to lead the university's efforts to prevent any gender and sex discrimination, harassment, and retaliation. Christine is also a doctoral candidate at Azusa Pacific University in the Department of Higher Ed, where her focus and research is the retention and success of Latinx first-generation college students. Thank you, Christine, for co-facilitating today. And also thank you, Carmen and Christine, for co-leading the Latinx Affinity Organization. I'm going to go ahead and open us up in a word of prayer, and then I'm going to hand it over to Christine and Carmen, and they will make special introductions of our panelists. Gracious Lord, just thank you for this day. Thank you for all those that are gathered to listen to our esteemed friends and colleagues in this important panel. Latinx perspective, dear Jesus, is also your perspective. Give us voice and give us that confidence for all of us to be part of this community, to open up our hearts and minds to multiple perspectives of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And dear Lord, may you use each one of us to be your humble instruments in paving a path that is straight for all students of color, faculty, staff, administrators of color, and everyone here at APU to nurture and celebrate the beautiful mosaic that you, dear Jesus, have created for all of us. Be with all of our panelists, be with our facilitators, and dear Lord, continue to guide us. And may you guide us in using all of the beautiful gifts you have empowered us with to do your will. And we give you all the glory. Thank you for this panel today, and thank you for everyone joining us. And we ask these things in your powerful name. Amen. So Christine and Carmen, hand it over to you.
Yes.
Welcome, everybody. So I'm going to go ahead and just put that other link one more time, because I think if you came in after I pasted it the first time, you won't be able to access it. So there's a link in the chat that will allow you to get a live transcript of today's session for anybody who might need it during the session or wants to look at it afterwards. So bienvenidos everybody. We're really excited that you're here today. Christine, oh, I'm sorry, I think I skipped over. Christine's gonna do a gratitude for us and then just talk about why we're here today. Christine?
Yes, thank you, Carmen. And I love Carmen, our accessibilities director is making all of this accessible to us. So thank you for that.
Hi, you're welcome.
Yeah, for the links. So good morning. I'm so happy to have you all here. You know, I just want to give a quick, just some words of admiration and thanks for all of our panelists who agreed to join us today. I think it's so important that as we continue to evolve as APU and our Latinx community has grown so much in terms of our students and staff and faculty and administrators. Overall, I think we've grown. However, as we all know, faculty and administrators in particular, we're still underrepresented in higher education and in leadership with our staff. And then even, you know, as our students continue to increase in attendance at APU, I think it's just so important. And we all do think that, you know, really believe that representation is important. And the folks that are here are excellent role models and leaders and people that we want to learn more about. So when I heard that you all had agreed to join us, I think it's such a privilege to be able to hear from you, your wisdom, your knowledge, your experience. Because as we know, the voices of Latinx individuals have been erased from our history, that our narratives are missing, and it's so important that we give voice to a group who are, we're not going away, right? You know, we're here and we are growing and we are making changes and significant marks in our respective areas of influence. So with that, I just want to say thanks, and I want to give it to Carmen to read the bios.
All right, so thank you, everybody. We're excited about this space that we've created for all of our voices, and our voices also reflect the voices of our students. So thank you for all the work that you do for the campus community, for our students. And I'm honored to introduce our distinguished guests. We have a great lineup for you today. I'm going to start with Carla. So Carla Consuelo Alejandro Mesa, beautiful name. Carla is a fourth-year student at APU and is a psychology and communication studies major. She's a first-generation student, a DACA recipient, was born in Mexico and raised in California, while also being half Guatemalan. This year at APU, Carla is serving as a student body president and as a resident advisor. Welcome, Carla. Thank you for joining us. Our next guest is Andre Garces. He is an adjunct professor in the Department of Leadership and Organizational Psychology with the School of Behavioral and Applied Sciences. He has taught foundations of leadership and leadership strengths and skills. And Andre also works as the manager of warehouse operations at APU. Welcome, Andre. Paola Martinez, she is our Vice President of Human Resources and has served as APU's VP of Human Resources since 2019. Prior to joining APU, she spent 20 years in national and regional human resource, leading strategies in employee relations and advocacy, talent acquisition and retention, executive and leadership coaching, performance management, organizational design, and change programs. Welcome, Paola. Our next guest is Martin Rodriguez. Dr. Rodriguez, let me see. So Dr. Rodriguez's undergraduate courses relate to the discipline of practical theology. He began teaching at APU in the fall of 2020. Martin was born in Northern California and raised in Puebla, Mexico. Like many Latinx peoples, he is learning to thrive in the borderlands and in the liminal spaces between his cultural narratives. Before beginning his PhD in intercultural studies in 2015, Martin's love for God and the global church led to 5 years of mission work or missionary work among emerging Christian leaders in East Asia. During this time, he developed an interest in the unique challenges of leading intercultural faith communities. He has over 15 years of experience working as a minister in multicultural contexts, and Martin's current research explores missiology through the lens of post-colonial hybridity theory and late modern leadership theory. Welcome, Martin. And last but not least, Neri Lemos. Neri Gabriel Lemos was born in Los Angeles in 1977. The subjects in his work range from issues of stereotype and immigration to problems in society that can lead to the failure of families, such as poverty, abuse, and neglect. Lemos received his BFA at Art Center College of Design in Pasadena, California in 2007, and his MFA at the California Institute of the Arts in Valencia, California. That was in 2009. Neri also attended the Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture in Maine in 2008. He is a recipient of a California Community Foundation Fellowship, a COLA Fellowship grant from the Department of Cultural Affairs, Los Angeles, the Rima Hortman Foundation Fellowship Award, and a Mignon Fellowship. He is represented by Charlie James Gallery in Los Angeles and is the director of the MFA in Visual Art program at Azusa Pacific University. And another thing I read about Neri is that your work has also been up, I think, in a gallery or museum in El Paso, Texas, which is my hometown. So I wanted to throw that in there. Thank you for that, and welcome, Neri. So Christine, I'll hand it over to you.
Okay, so one of my first questions is a general question for any of you to answer. And really we're wanting to hear from you just some points about what your overall lived experience is as staff, as faculty, as a student on this particular campus that happens to be a dominantly white campus and evangelical. So with that, maybe tell us why you chose to work at APU and what has been your experience with feeling embraced and valued as a Latinx individual by our community. Who wants to jump in first? Andre?
I'll go for it. I'm kind of nervous though, because now that I found it's being transcribed, we're going to have all this stuff held to us now to go back and look at, but that's all right.
Be honest, we need it.
Oh yeah, for sure. One of my life things is always to unsettle minds. So that's kind of like a thing that I don't want to get too much into that though. So I've been at APU for 12 years, started off, came here simply because for economic reasons. I realized that I needed more money because we had our first child. And so in order to get more money, you needed a degree to climb up the corporate ladder kind of thing. I ended up getting employed here. And as a result, I was able to finish my degrees and whatnot. My experience when I first got here was, I would say, one of feeling, I guess, accepted and embraced because I held to a certain perspective. And that was like a very traditional, conservative, evangelical perspective. And it was as a result of higher ed, which is a reason that I became very passionate for higher ed. I almost had like what I would call like a matrix experience, where if you saw the movie The Matrix, where like the world you were living in wasn't really true, and all of a sudden you were opened up to a new world. And so as a result of going through the process of higher learning and learning how to learn, my eyes were opened up to a lot more, and realizing that the importance of embracing your story and learning about your story and your heritage and whatnot, and then being allowed to be okay to embrace that. So, something growing up for me was that we never really practiced or were encouraged to celebrate our Hispanic culture and whatnot. Though I came from my grandfather was, a Mexican immigrant who came from wealth in Mexico, but saw the writing on the wall and came to America and ended up being a carpenter the rest of his life. And so as a result of higher ed, I became aware of that, celebrated that, and that exposed me to a lot more. And as a result, I began to realize that, wow, I really don't kind of feel like I fit in here or value because I have different perspectives now as a result of that. So my lived experience with APU has been one of just like a transition, and where I'm currently at a point where it's like, I don't, you don't really feel like you totally belong because I hold different perspectives, and I realize that the place I work at holds different perspectives as well. And so it's kind of tough because you don't really want to rock the boat, because this is where you got to come to work every single day. And then sometimes too, it gets tiring having to explain your perspectives all the time, and that kind of stuff. So in a nutshell, I hope I didn't take it all up, but in a nutshell, that's where I'm at.
No,
Thank
thank you
you.
on this. And I really appreciate you talking about this conflict, right? I feel like oftentimes we live in this kind of in two different worlds, right? As Latinx folks, depending on either where we grew up, where we came from, where our parents come from, where we find ourselves now, right? Is California, within California, in an Christian evangelical space of higher education. And I think that it oftentimes does feel like a conflict. So we thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, well, I think the other layer to that is the Western evangelical Christian perspective, because I think that's another layer on top of just like a predominantly white culture. And so that Western evangelical perspective of Christianity, we're not taught to celebrate our racial diversities. We're not taught to embrace it and for it to be okay. You enter into a Western perspective, which has its history in a Anglo-European perspective and whatnot. And so as a result, it just becomes this multi-layered thing that, in a sense, you have to break free from. I'm sure Dr. Rodriguez can kind of pull that apart even more. But I think that's an issue for it as a result of it as well.
Absolutely, thank you. So Richard, do you want to share your thoughts, since Andres kind of tagged you on that one? Did you say Richard? I'm sorry, who did you say, Andre?
Dr. Rodriguez.
Dr. Rodriguez, I'm sorry, Dr. Rodriguez.
Thank you. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Am I coming through okay? Yeah. I think my experience at APU has been probably different than a lot of folks. So I started last year, that was my first year, and I taught on Zoom from home. I had very limited interaction with a lot of the faculty and staff. My experience has predominantly been the experience of the classroom. And interestingly enough, the classrooms are not dominantly white, nor are they dominantly evangelical. So in my classrooms, I would say nearly half, if not more, in some of my classes, of my students are Latinas and Latinos or mixed heritage. I've had a handful of students that have complained that I use Spanish in class. I'll use Spanish terms. I'll use language and concepts from my family background. I tell my story, and I would say that mostly it's been welcomed by my students. In fact, this last week, I had a student that did something really cool. I have my students do podcasts for their midterm, and she shared in her podcast an interview that she did with her grandmother. And what was great is that there was a whole segment, like a clip, it was all in Spanish. It was a minute-long clip, but she felt comfortable to do that in the classroom. Not only because there's a lot of people that speak Spanish, but there's a sense that her story mattered. The voices of her grandmothers, right? The voices of her ancestors matter. So we had a chance to listen to a very wise woman for a whole minute in her own language, and then the student translated. So I feel like that kind of, reflects a little bit of kind of a welcoming space. And maybe that depends on the classroom as well. I personally have felt thankful for the quote evangelical, statements of faith that kind of, it's just nice, like, to be in a place where I don't have to fight those battles as well. And I agree that sometimes, we'll debate what it means to be evangelical. And I think there's a lot of diversity within that. I think there's even space for diversity within our statement of faith as a school, which I'm also thankful for. I felt embraced? I mean, absolutely. And valued as a Latinx individual? Yes, it's been fantastic being at APU. I mean, from my in like July in 2020 in August, when I was doing my interviews for the position as assistant professor of practical theology, it was my department head, Matt Olofsson, like Rukshan Fernando, the provost, were very explicit about their desire to create space for historically underrepresented minority scholars. We're in HSI and we need more Hispanic professors, right? That was very clear right from the beginning. So there was a sense in which I felt very welcomed. Even meeting folks early on, like Paula Martinez, right? Just very welcoming. Keith Hall reached out very early on and welcomed me. And it was, I mean, it's hard to begin teaching at a school where you're feeling really disconnected from everyone. So it's really nice when someone reaches out. Just last week, Kay Iguera Smith from the theology department just reached out and said, hey, we're both doing Latinx perspectives in our research. Can we talk some more? Nori Hank has reached out to me. And let's talk about possibly a minor or certificate in Latinx, Chicanx like studies, right? So I feel. There was also the HSI forum that was back in September. So I feel like that was sponsored by the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Division as well. So and Keith Hall was instrumental there. But Latinx pathways to and through college was the topic. So I feel like there's been a lot of space for that kind of conversation. My voice, I feel like, is welcome. My story is welcomed, certainly in the classroom.
Thank you, Martin. And if any of the other panelists wanted to share something around those questions?
I'm going to piggyback on Martin's sense of gratitude a little bit in my response. And I, like Martin, I have felt embraced coming to APU. I came in 2019, but before that I was here for a couple of more years. But my sense has always been that it is APU's intent to make everyone of a diverse background feel welcome and to be recognized for their potential contribution. I've not felt anything but that sense of welcoming both times that I've been here. But I think sometimes what happens, and I'm speaking for me personally, I was born in Lima, Peru. I've been here since I was 5 years old. I have a very diverse background just in terms of my family, part Greek, part Italian. I've always had people question where I'm from. And so I think I bring with me my own sense of maybe some disconnect, but not that I'm receiving it from APU, if that makes sense. I think that I come across a lot of folks that by my last name, there's an assumption that I'm Mexican. There is often an assumption, and I've had this prior to APU, where people feel like, well, all Latinos, Latinas, we're kind of the same, but we're really not. We have very distinct backgrounds within our own within our own heritage where we're from, and I think that's where I have felt the disconnect is in sort of stepping out and saying, well, I'm different, even though I'm a Latina, I'm still different than my peers that are of a Hispanic or Latin background. But I think with regards to feeling the sense of belonging and the sense of being embraced by APU, it's always been there. I think we've always been intentional about it, but I think I just, bring my own set of differences into the equation that I think it's difficult for folks to try to maybe make that differentiation when they introduce themselves, or at what point do you start talking about your differences. But I think this is where we're doing this, right? And I think these types of opportunities are really what I see APU being intentional about, which then speaks to those disconnects that we bring. Or maybe I'm just speaking for myself.
I would say for my experience, I appreciate what Paola was saying, because she's acknowledging that embrace. And I definitely have felt embraced, and particularly in our art department, really amazing. They've become really close friends of mine. But one of the things that I do, and also the students, right? So within our students, particularly students that are Latinx, that very few in our department. When it comes to mentoring outside, they reach out to me and say like, hey, can I talk to you about the things that I'm kind of struggling with and the things that I'm thinking about? So I felt that they have embraced me, and they do appreciate that I'm there, and I love that. But one of the things that I do find strange, and maybe Paola, this is kind of like what you're kind of going to, it's like when I'm in the leadership meetings, right? I am the only one that looks different from everybody else. And it feels strange at times where I'm like, I mean, at times I forget because they're the homies. I know them, I've been hanging around them for a while, but then I go like, wait a minute. Whoa, this is strange. So I think that's kind of like what ends up happening in a lot of universities, where they want diversity to happen. But diversity to happen means employing people, and there's people already in certain positions, and no one wants to leave those positions. So, I mean, maybe that's sort of the thing where you're in a place where you feel embraced, but at the same time, it's like there's something that feels different here. What's going on? How come I feel this feeling, right? It's like I was the only one invited to the party, and everybody looks the same, and I'm the one that looks different, kind of deal. Anyway, that's my little 2 cents there.
Thank you for that, Mary. I think that's an important point that you make. I think around feeling tokenized. I don't know, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, Mary, but I think oftentimes feeling like you're the only person of color in a space, especially in a leadership space, I think can take a toll on us, right? And there's something to be said about that. So thank you.
I agree with Mary as well. I came in as Carla Alejandro, and I'm leaving as Carla Consuelo Alejandro Mesa. And I didn't feel embraced until this year, if I'm being honest. I felt the same way, that they invited me to this big party. We're all Christians. We're all gonna study and serve the Lord. And then I came in and I was like, wait a minute, I don't look like any of you. And I go into the classroom and we speak about very different things or have very different values. Even within that, as Dr. Martinez was talking, just the layers of differences that we have. I am a DACA recipient. I'm first gen. I come from an immigrant household. That was so different, even interacting with Latinx students on campus, where they're third gen and they don't even speak Spanish. And I've had to come to also embrace them as part of our community and learn that that's also a different perspective, and my perspective is important too. But coming into APU, if I'm being honest, I did not feel embraced. I was marginalized, and I had to fight for my own perspective within the classroom. And I had to, and it's funny because I don't think it was until I got into leadership that my voice was heard, or my voice was now important or to be respected. So that's interesting. And it kind of sometimes makes me nervous for those that aren't in a leadership position. I'm grateful for the positions, and I've have amazing mentors this year that I feel like have empowered me to be who I am, to be okay with being a Latinx woman, an immigrant. I mean, I even had to embrace the fact that God can use an immigrant as SGA president. That for me, I have imposter syndrome. And it's like, God used Moses, and he could use you. He loves immigrants too. But because I was told so much, like, I do not belong here and that I'm a foreigner, and I've gotten to go back to your country, and I've gotten those little jokes before. So it's hard to step into and be empowered, but let go of your experience of what has been told to you in the past. So I don't think I felt it until this year, until I have found people like Kristen and Dr. Keith Hall and the provost, Roxanne Fernando, even my advisor, Bilar, all those people, even in Res Life, who embrace diversity. I think that's what has empowered me to be a Latinx student on campus and feel hugged by the faculty and staff mostly, which I think on the student side, when it comes student to student interaction, is sometimes a bit concerning. But that's a little bit about my experience.
If I could just say something about what Carla was saying, because she's talking about the student experience. And when I was in undergrad, you know, I was dealing with work, I still do, but dealing with work that deals with identity and culture, and particularly, you know, within Latinx community, I felt that it was always, well, why don't you try this? So why don't you try that? So it's one thing to, you know, to feel embraced as a faculty, but as a student, you know, you're coming in with ideas, and if a faculty member is not aware of like their sort of like their biases, which we all have, then that could be very problematic and very alienating for the student, right? So I think that that's, you know, when I think about like even like being a diversity ambassador and being in these sort of like circles, like I look around, I say like, man, you know, like all these people, like, man, we're like vibing with each other. It's like, it seems like you're not the people that need to be in these sort of diversity ambassador meet. It's like, we need to get some other people in here, you know. It's like, it's like we kind of like on the same page here, you know. It's like we're speaking to the choir, you know. So I just hope that grows. But, you know, I appreciate your perspective, Carla. And I'm Guatemalan, by the way, so awesome.
So thank you.
Speaking of that thing about the diversity that Carla was talking about, I think one of the complications with diversity in organizations is that they want the diversity, how do you put this, to look diverse, but when it comes to thought, we're not really as diverse in thought. And so it's almost like, you know, if you take a picture, a snapshot of the organization, oh, look, we're diverse because look, we have so many Hispanics, we have so many Black, we have so many Asian, but yet if you were to look internally, they all look or they all think the same. That's still not diverse. And the hard thing is learning how to break that mold where it's like, yes, get past the diversity where it's just appearing diverse, but also thinking differently and that being okay. And it being a place where it's okay to have different perspectives and you know, different values and whatnot. And the thing is that I think higher ed is supposed to be the place where that can live, because higher ed's where ideas collide and clash, and we're supposed to learn how to get along and learn new information and learn how to rummage through it. So yeah, so just throwing that piece out there.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point around the diversity of thought and experience, right? And the value that as Latinos and Latinas we bring to a campus such as APU, or to any campus or to any space that we find ourselves in. So I think with that, I think is my next question for you is then, and I feel like you've identified some of the challenges of being Latinos at the APU campus. Kind of what opportunities are there at APU to improve the sense of belonging or to forge community at APU? Because when I hear Carla saying it took me a long time to then finally feel like here now this year, I feel like a sense of belonging, right? What can we do so that students or that staff don't have to wait or feel lost? I know for myself, when I got here, I felt a little lost, kind of looking for my tribe and not sure exactly where they were, right? And just feeling a little off kilter for me. So I just want to hear from the panel, what are your ideas and what are those opportunities and how and to improve a sense of belonging at APU? So I'm gonna pick on Neri to go.
Yeah. Well, you know, for me, you know, being a director of a program, one of the things that I would say, it's like most of my students are females. In most art programs, it's females. I've worked in different schools. So for me, I believe that as a male, I have privilege in that. So in particularly being a director, right? There's privilege. So what do I do with that? You know, I spend my privilege, right? So the last people that I've looked at, that I brought up as faculty under me, they've all been female. And I've made sure that the people that I bring in, I vet them, I make sure that the way they think, that they're gonna be valuing diversity, And also, the other thing is when I invite guests, I make sure that I have those, I'm covering my bases. You know, I'm really looking at the needs of our students and, like, you know, the people that bring are able to meet those needs. And then the other thing is I look at curriculum, everything that's taught in our program. I say, like, well, you have a lot of seminal texts in here, but I don't see people of color in here. Oh, well, we do talk about them, but I include them. I was like, no, they need to be listed here as the seminal texts, because, you know, there's a lot of French philosophers and all this sort of thing. Yeah, but there's other people that you could include that could be very beneficial. So, I mean, I have privilege. I'm a director. I'm able to do these things, and I do them. I don't know if other people are doing them in at the school, but those are sort of things that I do to make sure our students are getting those voices to them. Yeah.
Thanks, Neri. Martin, I know you said you just started teaching. I don't know if you have any thoughts kind of around what Neri was talking about as a professor on campus.
Yeah, so the question to you, I love what you're sharing, Neri. I think that's so important, and I love that you're living it out too. I mean, part of it is, you know, you're it's never a simple story, and we're never just part of the oppressed or the marginalized, right? I mean, part of being mestizo is that you're both, and you're naming the patriarchy that is also part of the story. And if we don't name if we don't name the patriarchy, the classism, you know, it ends up being kind of us like vouching for our own voice while we crush other voices. And so I really appreciate that you're naming the complexity. You know, when I think about the opportunities to improve a sense of belonging at APU, first of all, I love the question, and I love the idea that I love the term belonging, because it implies ownership, right? Belong, right? It's a sense of ownership, like I get to own this, I get to shape this. But it's also that sense of belonging in the relational sense, which is about accountability and safety and feeling that friendship, that closeness. And for me, at least, you know, one of the opportunities, you know, besides looking at kind of like the broader, like, let's look at curriculum and I think that's super important. One of the other dimensions I would say is also just, it's the small things that we do in classrooms. It can be simple conversations, like celebrating a student who brings up her unique story and has the courage to share it. There's opportunities even in a classroom to ask a question like, you know, how has your cultural narrative enriched your conception of whatever topic? Like, tell me about your cultural gifts. Like, what are the gifts that and then celebrating those and saying thank you, like stopping the class and being like, thank you so much for saying that. Thank you for bringing, like, your voice matters. Man, those, we can't underestimate the importance of those conversations. The way they help shift dominant narratives, the way they help shift, you know, narratives that can be they can start feeling so oppressive. They can start feeling like dominant, right? But part of it is that we're allowing them to be dominant, and they don't need that doesn't need to be the story, right? So we can shift the narrative, and it can happen in small things, in small ways in classrooms. So that's one of the ways that I see there's opportunities to improve that sense of belonging.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Martin. That's so great. I love that you frame our contributions as gifts. That's a beautiful way to look at it. And also around taking ownership, right? Taking that sense of ownership and making a change, right? How do we become agents of change at APU? Paola, I want to kind of switch over to you because I feel like it's definitely relevant. I think given your position in human resources, what can we do kind of at the more macro level, right? To help forge the sense of belonging from a human resources perspective. And, you know, I think about diversifying the pool of applicants. What are we doing in those terms? What opportunities are there, like within human resource, or does human resources could offer to the campus community to help improve the sense of belonging for Latinos at APU?
Yeah, no, definitely. One of the things that I would lead with is that it's not HR's or just DEI's responsibility, right? To make sure that we are intentional about those practices. We do quite a bit of hiring throughout the year. That it begins there. It begins even before we're actually interviewing folks. It begins before we're even looking at applications. I've shared this with Keith Hall before. It begins as early on as the job descriptions. Do we write our job descriptions so heavy on the requirements that make it almost overwhelming for folks coming in from the outside to say, I can do that job? And that's something that I've been part of women in leadership groups in the past, and when you think about the folks that look at opportunities in organizations, a lot of them are overwhelmed by what they see that a person would have to do in the job, and it's probably not even necessary, at least not to any essential place. So even looking at how we're representing ourselves, certainly we want folks that can meet the minimum qualifications of the job, but not so overwhelming to where it detracts folks that would otherwise, great diverse candidates that would otherwise be very capable of doing the work. Certainly we have a number of things that we integrate into our recruiting, into our interview processes, into our conversations with outside folks that are already in place. But can we strengthen some of those things? Sure, we definitely can strengthen some of those practices. And also, just as we look at discrimination in the workplace, can we strengthen some of those processes, the lens that we utilize? But really, it begins with simple things, and it begins with things like treating everyone fairly, treating everyone equitably when it comes to the processes that we drive from an HR perspective. So yes, lots of focus, lots of ongoing opportunity, but I guess the point of everything is that it really just begins at the most minor efforts that we make towards our employees and towards our external applicants. What can we do to not overwhelm before we're bringing folks in, and what can we do to be fair in those practices?
Thank you, Paula. Carla, we also really want to hear from you in your student perspective, right? How can we help improve the student experience, right? So just kind of reflecting on those first years for you here, just share with us kind of your thoughts on that.
I think there are a lot of spaces on campus like that faculty and staff make that is just so important to hear student experience and stories from the first gen to the club like LASA. I think even for me, seeing all of you here and hearing about the positions you're in, that inspires me to have access to you and see that people that look like me or people who are part of the Latinx community do make it far. And that inspires me that I can make it far too, because they can do it. And I think even like being in my role now, it's like, I'm not just representing myself, I represent the DACA community, and I represent students who think that they can't make it just because of of our social location and the things that were put in our life. I think even through Res Life, they empower us so much for diversity, and through those spaces, I myself have been able to, they make us like do court events, and I have been able to kind of bring my experience and do like, okay, let's focus on diversity this month, and how will I implement everyone's experience into this court event, and how can I hear all your voices? So I think there's so many different aspects on campus where, depending on what space you go into, there is just, as an individual, a need to make room for everyone. And also a need to not make yourself like the important, but also to have your voice heard and have your story heard, and see how that actually impacts others, and how that's important for others to hear as well, so that we're able to even work better as a team, or just relate to each other as students and help each other succeed in those spaces. So I think even within the classroom, reading from different authors, different, yeah, just all the curriculums to the clubs to just on-campus experience. I think APU has done a great job at integrating that. I don't have any new ideas, if I'm being honest, because in that aspect, for sure, I feel pretty empowered by what's on campus.
Great. Thank you, Carla. So I kind of want to lean into our next question. I feel like it's relevant, given where we're kind of talking about how we can make these improvements and increase a sense of belonging. I want to hear from each of you about your thoughts around how does being Latinx contribute to the APU community, right? And to kind of speak, I just want to hear your thoughts around the value, right, that you bring, that we all bring as Latinx people to APU. So Andres, do you mind if I start with you? You look like you're thinking, maybe should I start with somebody else?
I think on that one just a little bit. So someone else, what am I going first?
Okay.
I had some ideas on that. Let me see, repeat the question. My mind just blanked right now.
Sure,
Say that one more time.
okay. How does being Latinx contribute to the APU community?
Oh, okay. Yeah, so, one of the things that I always talk about with my students is the idea that identity is something that's not fixed. Identity is something that continues to evolve and change as we come into contact with different peoples, different experiences. So many students are like trying to find oh, I just need to find my identity, who it is that I am. I'm trying to search for that. I said, well, good luck. I'll tell you this much. Once you think you found it, it's going to change and it's going to continue to change. So it's not going to be this fixed thing, So the beautiful thing about, being in a university is having different experiences, right? And I think when you do have various cultures, you're able to relate to people. And I think one of the major tools that is used for injustice is dehumanizing people. If you could dehumanize a particular group of people, then you could put them in cages, then you could mistreat them and, say they're committing a crime and not really think about the needs or why they migrate or what have you, And so I think when you start seeing various narratives and seeing wow, these individuals from this particular culture, I could relate to them. So having that voice there, I think is so important, and just having different voices, I think for me in my classroom, when, I have students from different backgrounds, I've had several Korean students, I say please use your language, use your experiences, bring it into the work, right? Because I think, at least for artists, I say, if you're trying to do something that you can't relate to, a lot of times you're going to lose interest. So find things that you find interesting, whatever that is, and I'll meet you there, right? Even if I don't understand it, teach me. And I think that's why it's so important. And that's what we bring, it's that diversity is not just, in vogue word, it's something that should be part of, be part of a university because of its importance, and I hope that, these things change, the idea of using diversity as like checking a box, right? It's like, okay, we're doing our diversity bit, so we're good, but not really understanding why that's important, and not really understanding the hiring process, all that sort of hiring. I keep on talking about hiring because I think it's so super important within a university, but that's what I have to say about that.
Thanks, Mary. Does anybody else want to go next? Martin, is there anything you might want to share?
I was just going to unmute and say, Carla, I'd love to hear from you on this question.
Well, I think, and the question is, if it's that, what do Latinx bring to the APU? Okay, just clarifying. I think we bring, I Neri was kind of talking about this, we bring our stories, make our struggles real, if that makes sense. I don't start off, hi, mi nombre es Carla, and I'm a DACA recipient, and I have plan A, plan B, that has been my whole life, whether there's deportation that happens in my life, and don't open the door because ICE might be there. I don't start with that. I start with, I'm Carla, and you get to know me as Carla, and later on you get to know that I'm a DACA recipient, and this is real, and this is my struggle. And what you hear on the news and see on the news is not just something you hear and see on the news. The kids in cages, those are lives. And I think just, knowing that even people that my grandparents are pastores in Mexico, and my parents help missions in Mexico también, where we help immigrants at the border. And a lot of them were separated from families, and we hear their stories of the aftermath of not knowing where, a man who doesn't know where his daughter is, and really bad things happen to her within that process. And those stories are real. And I think what we bring to the table is amplifying those voices. And even, I feel like even everyone here amplifies a voice in our community, because we all look so different. We all come from different perspectives on the Latinx scale, from male to female, Peruana, Mexicana, Guatemalan, all of those. I think we all come from different perspectives, and we amplify those voices and make spaces for them. Even there, I think we're also breaking stereotypes. We're breaking big stereotypes. I think, for me, I wasn't even supposed to make it past high school. Probably supposed to be pregnant by now, statistically. So we're breaking stereotypes, we're amplifying voices, I think we're just also bringing that sense of community to APU, because we value community, we value family. And I think Latinos just do that so well, where we just want everyone to have a seat at the table. We want everyone to be welcomed, and let me make you feel welcome. Let me get you a plate, and let's sit down and eat together and get to know one another. I think our culture is just so rich and so beautiful and full of so many diverse backgrounds, that we just bring so much love and so much strength to the table, especially at APU.
Thank you, Carla. That was beautiful. Thank you.
All right, I think I got my answer now.
All right.
So I would piggyback both off Carla and Neri's both. I think what we bring from our Latin experience, or when we bring it to APU, how do I rephrase this now? It's offering more enrichment to life. And I think it goes both ways. It's reciprocal, because I don't think life is meant to just be, one way, mundane. And so the more we interact with each other, we bring our different perspectives and different experiences and different traditions and all these things to help one another go, wow, that life is so much more richer now. So with me, it's like, if I come to the table, I'll use food as an example. Everyone, if I'm around a bunch of maintenance guys and they're all white males, they may talk about steak, and I'll say, well, hey, have you heard about carne asada? And they'd be like, well, what's that? So it's almost like this whole new, and we give it to them, and they're like, wow, that's the greatest stuff in the world. And so it's offering this new perspective, and it can go both ways. I may have never had a steak before, and they may grill it their way, and then I taste, I'm like, wow, that's a really good way of cooking a steak, and I'm sorry for just the simple illustration, but I think that's what it brings. When I come to APU with my Latin experience and my Latin story, I'm offering more of an enrichment to life to another individual who wants to learn about it and learn about my Hispanic heritage and all these things, and so often I can also be enriched by their life and their experiences and whatnot. And I think what's going to happen is that we're going to see common themes going through that. We're going to see struggles. We're going to see having to deal with hardship. We're going to have to be dealing with, being discriminated against and whatnot. But how we help one another with that. So I think that's what I would answer to that is in coming to APU, my Latin experiences and story would bring that richness to the community. And then, vice versa as well, having that humility to be able to learn, reciprocate with each other. So.
Thank you, Andre.
We have about 4 minutes left, and we had some questions online, and when people registered, and a lot of them have been answered. But in the few minutes that we have left, maybe a few of you can respond to this. And it's what, so I'll just ask it, and this will be a nice way to think about moving forward. So in present day, what are some of the things that have been hurtful to the Latinx community? And what can we do as individuals to make sure our Latinx sisters and brothers feel seen, known, and heard? So what can be done to make sure that our Latinx sisters and brothers are seen, known, and heard?
Well, that's a hard one. I mean, I think, one of the things that it's on everyone's mind right now, just say it, it's like, I believe all terms are problematic, every single one of them, as far as like Latino, Latinx, Hispanic, all of them are problematic, but we use them to find some sort of like commonality and understanding. And I think having grace with people, how they identify themselves. I think a lot of times we're very hard on each other, depending on what term someone decides to identify themselves with, particularly when it comes to generations, right? So I came up in the time of, Latinos, that we use the word Latinos. So now it's like people are using the word Latinx. Earlier generations used the word Hispanic, and, people sometimes call themselves Chicanos as well. So, I mean, I think if there's space, we could get into a conversation about the politics behind terms and stuff like that. But I try to, find commonalities with people. And that's just one of the things that I was thinking about, that popped in right to my head, because it's something people have been talking about a lot.
Thanks, Terry. We've got 2 more minutes. Does anybody else want to jump in on that one?
Or any final words? Any last words as we close? I think we're going to have to do a part 2, y'all, because this is good.
It's rich. It's been rich.
Final words. I don't know. I would say just in the hopes of being advocating for one's own culture, I think sometimes, I was part of MECHA before, if you've heard of that organization, but sometimes we can become very ethno-nationalistic and not build alliances with other people. So that's one of the things I would make sure that that we don't get so blinded by, our hope and to advocate for ourselves that we forget to advocate for others.
Yeah.
One of the things that I urge in a lot of my scholarship is just humility, that recognition of the complexity and the way that causes us to lean into a more humble spirit. So complexifying the story is similar to what I was talking about. It's related to what I was talking about before, but we are not just oppressed, we are oppressors as well. And so I think one of the things that I appreciate, and this goes back to the question of like, what do we contribute? And it's a reiteration of a couple of themes that Carla brought up. But that, man, So my great grandmother, I call her Nana Lupe, right? So she arrived in Los Angeles in 1910, Olvera Street. She's experienced discrimination during her life, right? She passed away at 106 years old, not that long ago in 2015. So I mean, she was like, she's experienced a lot. She's experienced oppression, she's experienced racism, and she was also racist. And so there's a part of me that's like, man, can we be more nuanced in our conversations, right? Like, this is not just for like white people, right? This is not just for like people of color, like everybody. Can we be more nuanced in our conversations? Even the last 2 years, we've seen a lot of growing sensitivity to like more, non-dominant culture narratives and appreciation of those narratives. And yeah, there's been pushback, but pushback because change is hard, right? We're actually, the loss is uncomfortable. But I'm wondering, man, how great would it be if we leaned into these conversations, all of these conversations, with a sense of humility, a sense of like, man, I know I don't have it all together. I'm victim and also victimizer, right? Neri, that's one of the things that I love that you mentioned earlier, where you're just like, you called it out in yourself. You're like, I'm in this position and it gives me power, and that power I do my best to not abuse, right? But it's hard. We're in complex systems. So I mean, I don't know, maybe that's part of what we bring to the table, is just that, man, our complex narratives, like Carla, you were talking about, right? Our complex stories, they remind us to be humble.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. This has been wonderful. Thank you for all your comments in the audience. I think we're going to need to do a part 2 if you agree to in the future. Thank you, everyone, for attending, for your interest, for your ears, for being part of our community, so that we all have ownership of this university in whatever capacity that we are serving. So.
And
Yes.
Speaking of community, if you're interested in joining LFSAA, then we can send you out more information. Please keep your eyes open for future events like this. Maybe that part 2 coming up sooner than later. And diversity ambassadors, that came up a few times today. If you'd like to join that network in the spring, please let us know. And a special thank you to our facilitators, Carmen and Christine, and our invaluable panel and your voices. You've inspired me and others on this call. So thank you for everyone participating and listening today. God bless each and every one of you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, everyone, so much.
Have a great day.
Bye-bye. Have a good one.